Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffet as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas, sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Moffet, and I'm in Burrowang in New South Wales in Australia. It is Thursday afternoon, and I'm talking with Dr. Jennifer Smith, who's in Calgary in Canada, and it's Wednesday evening over there, so she's a little bit behind in the time, but temperature-wise, Calgary's warm at this time of year than usual, and Burrowang's cold at this time of year than usual. So anyway, Jennifer, welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Thanks for making time. It's nice to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Jennifer, we had a quick chat beforehand, and that's the first time we've ever spoken, but you and I have been connected on LinkedIn, and that's what drew me to seek you out as a guest for the Ultimate Dental Podcast, because I saw that you were doing some great things as a coach and consultant and a speaker in the dental space, and particularly with female dentists, which is good. And I like that. We'll get to that in a minute, but tell us about your journey, because you're actually you're not even a dentist anymore. You're actually an orthodontist. So you've jumped the hoop into a nicer paddock. So tell me about your journey from school to dental school and then orthodontics. How did that come about?
I love that story, actually. And we do call it Club Ortho in my house because it is Club Ortho. I mean, it's pretty chill. It's pretty chill in the ortho world. So I actually decided I was going to be a dentist when I was 12 years old. I had told my mom that I was going to be a dentist, and I believe she said, ew, because she thinks teeth are gross, and there's no one in healthcare in my entire family. But when I think back on why I made that decision, it was because of all of the adults that I had interactions with at around that age. The only person that seemed to really love their job was my dentist. He was this happy man. He's still practicing. He's almost retired. And he seemed so excited to see me and excited to talk about teeth. And I thought, well, I bet he doesn't go home and complain about his job. Maybe I want to be a dentist. And so I sort of made the declaration at that point in time and worked hard at school, always loved school, and went away to school. I did University of Calgary here in Calgary, and then I went up to Edmonton to the University of Alberta for dental school. I graduated in 2004. My husband, who we weren't married yet, but my husband was a year ahead of me in dental school, and so I sort of followed him up there. And I remember saying in my fourth year of dental school, I will never go back to school. I am done with school. I feel like it's already been too many years. I'm just going to go be a general dentist. I'm going to enjoy myself. It'll be great. Life doesn't always toss at you everything you want. And we moved to Michigan, to Ann Arbor, where my husband got into his oral maxillofacial surgery residency. And I started driving across the border every single day from Michigan into Ontario to work as a dentist. I didn't have a US license, and we were only 40 minutes from the border. So I thought I can do that for 6 years. Why not? Until you do it for about a year and realize that that's rather miserable. I unfortunately was in a practice where some insurance fraud was happening, I guess is the best way to put it. And I had to leave suddenly when I discovered that there was some nefarious things going on. And all of a sudden I found myself without a job. So I started working in Michigan at one of the dental corps, and a girlfriend that I had met there who was an orthodontist, who was also married to an oral surgeon, weird coincidence, also Canadian, living in Michigan, sat me down one day and said, you need to go back to school. There is nothing better than ortho. I know you don't think you want to, but like there is not an alternative. And I am a fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal. So my husband came home from residency that day and I said, I'm applying to ortho. And he was like, hold on, you've never once even mentioned that you were going to go back to school. I'm like, I'm doing it. So I applied. I got in. I actually finished before he graduated because ortho's only 3 years and oral surgery was 6 years. And so then I actually came back to Canada and started working while he finished, and then went to Scotland to do a year fellowship. So we lived apart for a little while. I had 2 kids already at that point in time. So I single mommed it for a little bit, and now we've both been in Calgary. He came back in 2011, and we've been here and both working here ever since.
Oh, so you weren't from Calgary originally then?
I was not born and raised in Calgary. I moved around quite a bit. My husband was born and raised in Calgary, but my dad was in oil and gas. We moved around a lot, but I lived in Calgary for a little window of time, so I knew the city.
Okay, lovely.
Yep.
Interesting how your friend told you that you needed to go into ortho, because it just reminded me that when I was in dental school, one of my instructors in prosthetics, in removable prosthetics, had a master's in pros. He also went back and became an orthodontist. and then set up in a growth area where there was just children everywhere. And yep. I go, well, that's the answer. Dan Kennedy says, where there's the best place to set up a business, where there's a screaming, starving crowd. And so wherever there's children that need their teeth straightened, and more and more and more. So that's great. So you've been in orthodontic practice in Calgary for how long now?
Since 2000. Well, I moved back in 2009. I've owned my practice since 2011.
Wow. But now you're also a dental coach.
I am.
Where did the transition to that thought come from?
I think the first time it crossed my mind was being at a dental conference. So I do try to attend a few conferences every year, usually in beautiful places around the world. And it came to a point where I was traveling with my business partner, and people would always pin us down at lunch and ask us why we were so happy. How could we talk so joyfully about our jobs? We seemed to be very successful. We also enjoyed each other's company, which they found interesting. A lot of partnerships aren't that happy. And people started asking us for advice. So we were often being asked, how you keep talking about how good your team is. How'd you build that team? You seem to be so confident about decision making. Like, how do you know what's the right thing to do? And I remember sitting down, it was actually during the pandemic, and I thought, there's got to be a way that I can help other people shortcut the journey that I knew I had already been on. It had been a struggle. I bought a practice that was horrible and struggling and was very difficult to be in, and turned it into the business that I have now. And I decided at that point that I was going to see if I could make a go of that. And it's been this lovely, fun, exciting journey of helping mostly other women. Other people find me on the internet, but mostly other women with their practices, and finding those pieces that they either don't naturally have, a lot of us don't, but also are not taught well in dental school on any level, which is how to manage people, how to motivate people, how to change the culture of a practice, how to even get systems and processes set up that people are held accountable to. There's so many little pieces like that I think a lot of women especially struggle with. And I think for me, the reason I've focused on women is leadership for women, when we in general in dentistry lead a team of women, is a different dynamic often than a man leading a team of women. And we don't have to get super deep into that, but women struggle with wanting to be liked and also wanting to be respected. And it's a piece that I really love to help them nail. They don't have to be a pushover, but they also don't have to be a B word. They can live in that happy middle ground.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and as a coach myself, after 13 years of coaching, I've ended up with a 2-to-1 ratio of women dentist clients compared to male dentist clients, and they're primarily dentists around 40 plus, just 40 plus, who have, as we were talking before, the family set up. They now have an opportunity to, as one of my clients once said to me, she said, David, it's time for me to put my big girl pants on and run this as a business. And And like you said, dental school doesn't train anybody. They get a piece of paper that tells that they can do class 1 fillings, and if they're lucky, learn how to take out teeth or write orthodontic referrals. My orthodontic undergraduate years was, oh, you've got crooked teeth, let me write a referral, and that was it. There was nothing else. Maybe take an impression, but there's no business training, there's no HR training, there's no marketing training, there's no the logistics, and even as a coach myself, I've got one client and she's already got an HR firm that she deals with. That you got questions about employment law or employment conditions, ask them. They're more up to date than me on the and it's state by state as well, as you would imagine. Yep. So it is a tough role, but I don't know who sold the dental profession this model, because the people at university aren't doing their job properly, because the course should be longer and more detailed, and then they sell it to graduated dentists who own their own business and say, can you mentor these people? So take time out of your own production to actually sit there and try and sometimes some people don't want to learn. They just go, oh, and you've heard it. If I become a better dentist, I'll be a better business owner. It doesn't work that way at all. But It sounds like you've hit you've really hit the sweet spot, because people are coming to you because you're standing out in a crowd. And I've often had memories of people I've met in the past outside of dentistry, and people would say, it's the old Billy Crystal line, or Billy Crystal movie, and Meg Ryan, I'll have what she's having, whatever she's on, I want that. So obviously you've got that magnetic personality that attracts people to you, but you also have that ability then to be able to spread the right word and help people improve their practices. And you mentioned there about helping them to shortcut the mistakes, and that's all a coach really ever wants to do, is help people get to the benefit of being a practice owner. There is a massive benefit, but the problem is that half the dentists in the US, more than half of them, don't even want to be dentists, and they're just stuck with their practice debt, their student debt, their household debt, and it's just a chore. Dentistry is a chore.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely the truth. I think it's an interesting market too, because I think the stats I've last seen in the U.S., especially, because that's a huge market, is they're graduating more dentists than ever into markets that are more competitive than ever. And so there's this feeling or this sense that if you haven't been taught how to market and how to lead and how to create what it is that in your vision, you really wish that you were working in and running, so your days were enjoyable and work wasn't a chore. If no one's being taught how to do that, and then you're in a situation where competition is super heavy and it's a struggle to be as profitable as dentistry maybe was 15, 20 years ago, there's this clash now where you sort of either have to treat it like a job you check into, working for a corporation or something, where you go and you get paid to do the thing and you go home. And ownership almost feels really hard and really elusive for a lot of people. And I feel like that's a sad thing, because practice ownership has been maybe the best part of my journey. I love the freedom and control that gives me. And of course, there's financial benefits to it as well. But I wish everybody could see that those people who have figured it out aren't special or unicorns in any way. They just have a skill set that these other people haven't learned yet. And so they just need to learn the skills, the tools, the strategies that other people have already learned. I've learned everything I've learned from people who've already done it. That's sort of how it's supposed to work. And so it's trying to make this available to as many people as possible so that they can create that thing that they so desperately want, and they can't close the gap. That's the only issue. They just can't get from here to here because no one's taught them the skills in the middle.
Yeah, and sometimes they haven't been able to realize that these are things that they need to not try and work out on their own, because that's like going around in circles. And meanwhile, time advances and takes them further away, because they're treading water and the current is taking them downstream when they're still trying to be where they are. And again, sometimes, and I've said it, they think they're smart enough to get into dental school, they're smart enough to get through dental school, so they think they're smart enough to work everything out themselves.
Yep.
And then they're not. I look at it. I remember when I sold my practice, I invested in 3 big blue chip companies in Australia just before the .com bubble burst. So I lost money on the stock market on big blue chip companies, and I thought, I haven't got the time to do the research. Let me pay somebody who knows the market, who would have told me to not go in at that time, and just keep doing what I know well. And if I don't know that well, then I'll learn some more of that as well. So it's tough. Do you find that with clients that sometimes you tell them what to do and yet they don't do it, and then down the track you say, if you'd have done this back then when I told you, we'd be in a different place than we are.
Yes, I think it happens. And the funny thing is, I've had a few women say to me, what you're saying makes sense. This is all very logical, and I can see exactly why I should do those things. But just so you know, I'm not going to. Like, they're very honest with themselves. Like, this sounds like too much work, maybe, and they're not going to. But more so than not, they hear it, they understand it, and think they can go it on their own. That's a conversation I've had several times. They're like, yeah, you've told me the stuff, and I've got this. I can figure it out. And then I reconnect with them, and they haven't done anything, because it's very easy to get caught up in the overwhelm of stepping into something you've never done before, and this sense that maybe you can just figure it out. And I tell my story all the time about how my struggle in my practice, when it was really, really bad, and I didn't want to be there, and I thought, I made such a big mistake here. I just spent, $1 million buying a practice, and I don't know how to turn it around, and I don't know what to do. And my brother-in-law threw a book at me and was like, this seems like it's up your alley. I think you need it. It was called The Happiness Centered Business. I'm sure you've heard of it, by Dr. Patty Lund. He's an Australian.
Lund,
and
yeah.
I remember reading the book and going, hold on a second. I think it's time for me to take a little bit of personal responsibility here and make it my job to learn the things that I clearly don't know, because I wouldn't be stuck in this mess feeling like I'm on a hamster wheel if I actually knew how to do it differently. And so it started with books, but then it turned into courses, and then mentors and coaches myself. And I've been in several masterminds, and I took that learning journey, and I've always loved learning. But I get where people get stuck, where it feels like they should know enough. And unfortunately, dental school didn't even tell them that they're going to not teach them most of what they need to know. So no one's giving you the heads up that you need to keep working on yourself and your skill set even after you graduate, and not just how to be a better dentist or endodontist or orthodontist or oral surgeon. But if you're not working on the other skill set that goes with running a business and managing people, you're doing a disservice to yourself, and you're slowing down your success, because that's probably a bigger player in success over the long term than whether you can make a perfect class 2 filling.
Of course it is. And although you're not a restorative dentist anymore, you're probably familiar with the story of looking in a mouth and going, it's a train wreck in there. You say, who did this? And they go, oh, Dr. Jones, he was such a good dentist. We were with him for 20 years. And I go, yeah, I can't imagine how he's been able to get that stuff to stay in there. He's done some amazing things, but it's because Dr. Jones was a nice guy, and so they stayed with him. I actually was gifted a practice by a dentist who was retiring, who couldn't sell his practice, so he just turned up. Or he was referred to me by his landlord, who said, and he just turned up. He said, I'm going to bring my filing cabinet over, so paper files, Kalamazoo files, and I'm going to get my phone connected to yours. And I said, how much do you want for this? He said, just look after them. And some of the patients would say, the joke was that he was going to retire when his nurse was earning more than he was out of the practice. But he had these people who'd been going to him for so long, but he had never restored them properly. It was always just patch. And so the opportunity of giving these people mouths that were predictable restoratively was great. And some of them would say to me, I've never been able to chew as well as I can chew now. Thank you for fixing my teeth properly. And they'd say, we knew he kind of wasn't looking after us, but we still enjoyed his company. And so again, there's that customer service or that relationship going on in that dental practice. And it's a really important thing that if you're a people person, you can avoid a lot of the issues that happen in a practice. You can diffuse a lot of things because people trust you and they believe, well, sometimes things just don't go to plan, but you're going to make it better. All right. And that's really important. Tell me, you told me before we came on air that you've just been speaking in Orlando at a Women in Orthodontic conference.
Yes.
How many people were at that? How many attendees?
I believe it was over 400 doctors, and then there was some team there as well.
Oh, wow. Good. And so you did a presentation, you were telling me it was titled The Seven
Practical Steps to Building the Team and Culture of Your Dreams.
All right. So tell me about that, because even as I owned my own practice for 28 years. I owned and ran it. So I sold it after 21 years and then stayed on for 7 years through 2 owners after that. But I still got to manage it and run it. But it was often a challenge of getting the right people on the bus and making sure that when you had the wrong people on the bus, that you got them off the bus quick and replaced them.
Yes.
So how did you build a team culture? Because for me, long-term staff, longest, and I put this down the fact that they were also female, and so a lot of people, nearly every hygienist I had left to have a family. That was the one reason they left, was guess what, David? I'm going to have a baby, and so it's. But how do you build long-term employees and long-term culture in your practice?
So it's a wonderful question. And I will preface this by saying that I think that changing the culture of my practice was probably the single biggest change that propelled us to the practice we have now, which is over 5 times revenue-wise the size of the practice I bought, and now with 2 locations and 3 doctors, because we never really focused on the numbers game, if that makes sense. Because initially the reason I hated going to work and I needed to change it was because I wanted to work in a place that I enjoyed being at. And so culture was the first thing I worked on. And of course, that has a snowball effect. And so the practice started growing very rapidly as soon as the culture changed, because people felt good when they came in and people appreciated the way we spoke to each other, the way we spoke to them. And then we had team loyalty all of a sudden, and they were seeing the same faces over and over again. And so when I spoke at the conference about this idea of building team and culture in a way that supports the vision that the owner or the doctor has for the practice, I'll give you a quick rundown of the 7 steps, and then we can dive into any that you want to. But the first step was visioning, which was you have to have defined exactly what it is you're trying to create. If you don't have a target, you're going to struggle to hit anything. So we have to know, we have to write it down, we have to talk about it. We talked a little bit about sharing that with the team, so you have a vision that everyone is working towards. And I consider this different than goal setting or even a mission statement or core values, because a vision for me is really about the feel of the practice. How do you want to feel when you walk in? How do you want patients to feel when they walk in? How do you want your team to feel? How do you want people to communicate with one another? So that part has to be defined. And then the second really big one is making sure that there are expectations set for everyone within the practice. And expectations, once again, sometimes people lump that together with job descriptions or SOPs. But when we talk about expectations of the practice, we talk about the way people show up and the way people behave and the way people speak. Yes, the way people look and smell is in there too. People always ask me about that. But it really comes down to how we expect people to show up every day. And it is written down and it's very well defined. And it means that everyone's operating from the very same playbook. We can pull it out from an employee of 15 years or an employee of 2 weeks. And we're all playing from the same exact playbook, that you will show up as a team player and you will follow our communication rules, which I'll get to in a second, and all of those things. Because when people don't know what you expect, they make it up and they guess. And sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong. And it's not because they're a horrible or a bad person or they don't care. It's because we all have expectations about everything in this world that we've made up based on the life we've lived to this point. So if we haven't told someone what we expect when they're working for us, then they're winging it. And that sometimes doesn't work out very well, especially the bigger the team gets. Then I spoke about communication, and anyone who's familiar with Dr. Patty London, it was my favorite thing that in that very first book that triggered my whole journey was this idea of rules around communication, meaning that we have guidelines for every single person on the team of how we are allowed to communicate with one another. And it's not about speaking versus text versus email. It's about the words we choose, the energy we come with. And that on its own completely transforms culture, because it eliminates things like drama and negativity and gossip and cliques forming and all of those things that nobody likes to have within a practice. And so one of our rules, as an example, is that we always blame a system, not a person. And that means if a mistake happens, the very first conversation we have is, do we have a system for that? Did we train on that system? Is there a reason people aren't following the system? And we solve those questions first. It's never to blame a person, because people will make mistakes. By blaming a system, it makes it okay to make a mistake, and then we'll fix the system so that mistakes happen less often. We also have rules around only using positive language. So we can't blame someone or make a complaint type statement. Instead, we're always solution focused. It's always, okay, something didn't happen here the way we wanted. How do we make it better? And the example I use, and I laugh about it, but snarky Jen used to come around quite a bit. I can be a little bit sarcastic and a little bit snarky when I'm not at my best self. And I gave the example of, if you have a, procedure you're doing right before lunch, and for some reason something didn't get sterilized, and you're realizing that you won't be able to do exactly what you wanted to do, or you're going to have to wait. Snarky Jen would say something like, so we don't sterilize instruments now. Good to know. And that would have been my statement to a team member, and that bites. That's emotionally biting, and it doesn't build up my relationship with that team member or actually solve anything. But sometimes when we're frustrated, things like that come out of our mouth. And now an example I give is, a better response would be first a deep breath and a pause. I'm good at that now. And then saying something like, hey, I just noticed that a load of instruments didn't get sterilized. Can we figure out what system's broken so that this doesn't happen again right before lunch? And if you need my help, please let me know. And although the team member who maybe didn't follow the system might feel bad for a second that they didn't follow the system, no blame was laid, and solution was triggered. And my relationship with that person is now probably better and way better than it would have been had snarky me come out. But the other thing we teach to our team when we teach this is that a repair is more powerful even than sometimes getting it right the first time. And so if snarky Jen came out that day and I come back around an hour later and go speak to that assistant and apologize and tell her what I actually meant and promise to do better, our relationship is probably even better than even if I got it right. And by being honest and vulnerable and open in our communication in this way, when the boss does it especially, it makes it okay for everyone to make mistakes, and it makes it a very safe place to have communication. And so for us, these communication standards or rules that we set, and those are just a few of them, we have 8, really transformed the whole feel of the practice, because no longer does anyone ever hear words that are complainy or negative, and there's no gossip because those things aren't allowed. And of course, we hold people accountable to those. I'll get there in a second, but that's really important too. The fourth thing, a practical step, is just feedback. Because as you know, because you've been doing this for a very long time, I consider feedback like a magic wand, because it basically is, if you want a behavior to continue, you give feedback. If you want a behavior to change, you give feedback. And the method that we use is one taught by Dr. Cole Johnson. He's an orthodontist in the States, and I've seen him lecture several times, and I love the way he teaches this. He did not invent it. He has taken it from many business books, but I like the little acronym he uses, and it's just about giving feedback that's immediate and specific and has consequences and holds people accountable. And we teach our whole team this structure so that we are always giving feedback, because you really do have to give it at about a 5-to-1 ratio of good to constructive if you want people to really behave in the way that you want. And people are desperate and starving to be appreciated, and we often don't appreciate enough. I was so guilty of that. I only spoke to people when I needed something to be different than what they were doing, because I was afraid that if I complimented or praised people too much, that maybe they wouldn't take the time to focus on the things that they were, struggling with or lacking on. And I've learned over time, of course, that it's the opposite of that. The more you pump people up, the more likely they are to actually then fix the things that aren't the way that you want them to be. So it's a huge component in how we run things in the practice. And then the next step is accountability, which is you have to set up systems to hold everybody accountable. We've all been guilty of attending a conference and getting really excited about something and then trying to change it and realizing 2 months later that nothing really changed, even though we were super excited about the change we wanted to make. And that is usually because accountability isn't in place. And women struggle with this, especially, I've noticed. And it's a little bit about feeling like the bad guy or the police sometimes, because when accountability isn't set up well, we feel like we're micromanaging or noticing the bad things and picking people apart. But I think good accountability is actually about connection, not about policing. And it's about setting those expectations and having conversations ahead of time and agreeing as a group how we'll hold each other accountable, which is very different than I think what a lot of people think of when they think of accountability. They just think it's, catching people doing it wrong. And that's not actually what it is. Number 6 is an easy one. We talk about gathering data. You have to ask your team how they're doing and how they're feeling if you want things to be better, because we can't read people's minds just like they can't read ours. So we put expectations in place so they know what we're thinking, and then we ask them what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what's working and what's not, so we can make change with actual information. Setting a goal for your practice for collections, you look at numbers, and figure out what to do. You go with facts. If we're just guessing how the culture is doing and the team is doing, we're probably wrong a lot of the time, because we can't read other people's minds. So we must gather data. And the 7th step is actually just personal growth, which is taking the time to work on ourselves and to reflect and to take responsibility that even whether we want to or not, the entire team is looking to us all of the time. How do we handle stress? What do we do when things go sideways? How are we communicating with people and with patients? And I think it's unfair to ask people to do things you're unwilling to do yourself. And so when I started changing my culture and was asking people to be better communicators and to have these hard conversations, I had to become an expert at it first before I could teach them that. Otherwise, I was asking them to do something that I was incapable of doing. And although I did that very short and very summarized, I don't think I could pull any of those 7 things away and have the practice that I have now.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and kudos to you, because there's no real gap in what it's a complete list. And you're right, you can't just pull one out and say 7's too many, let's cut it down to 5, because then you create a void. It's like a sporting team. Somebody gets sent off, there's a hole in the defense, and somebody goes through. It's that simple. I love the way you reference back to Paddy Lund. Did you ever meet him?
I didn't. I really wish I would have, because a lot of the stuff that his books that he wrote and the stuff that he taught were very pivotal for me in starting to make some of the really big changes that I made. I just loved the way he explained things. I loved his story.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to speak with him at a mastermind group conference in 2007. And then I also saw him, must have been about 7 years later, he spoke at one of the Maddow Brothers events in Las Vegas as well. But he's retired from dentistry and was living in Southeast Asia. So he was living the dream. But he certainly was a visionary, and he was ahead of his time. And again, his primary driver, I think, was customer service and having systems to back up that customer service. And I've got a quote that I refer to from James McManaman, who was the head of the Ritz-Carlton hotels. And he said, first thing, if I was starting any business, is that I've got to have a vision. And he said, and I've got to be able to tell people what that vision is. And then from there, then when I'm recruiting, I'm looking for people who share that vision and make sure that they do share that vision. And then from there, then we then see whether we can work out the systems that go with that vision and whether we can then teach those systems as well. Because, and you can't really say, here's the systems, now let's see if we can find the people, because there'll always be a weakness. So it's interesting. And I've just recently met a recruiter in medical and dental and allied health, and he says he's thrown out the old resumes. He recruits for these practices, and so they ask questions and find people with specific characteristics that make them last 3 times longer in the jobs that they place them, even though they have no skills. They can learn the skills, but they can't learn the behaviors as easily. Very hard to, I think one of my mentors in customer service said, I asked someone, are you happy? And they go, yeah, I'm happy. And he goes, well, tell your face, because your face your face is not showing that you're happy.
I like that. I will use that.
You're welcome to. But yeah, little things, and you would have picked it up. We had a long corridor in our practice, and had to address the fact that if somebody was passing another team member, and if that team member was with a patient, they would look sideways. Now it's kind of like, no, wave, say hello, give that impression of friendly people talking. And so a lot of things that happen in my career in terms of technology. So I was a pre-computer dentist, but then when computers came in, and then the software got better, and all of a sudden software prevented people. Everything was done on the computer. Your computer would light up that your next patient was there, and I said, we've got to have conversations where people it just breaks it for the person in the chair, and they hear people talking nicely to each other. Thank you, just letting you know, and having conversation. Oh, Mrs. Jones is here. Ask her how her daughter's wedding was. Her daughter was getting married since last time she was in. And so again, conversations, and you said, how do we say things? We used to have a receptionist would come in and say, Mrs. Jones is here for her 10 o'clock appointment, and she knows she's early. And I'm going, that's like saying she knows she's stupid. How can we say that better? Because it's kind of like, because she was actually saying to Mrs. Jones, you know you're early. And I'm going, why don't you say, thank you for coming in early? That really helps us if you come in early, because sometimes we're running ahead of time, and so it can help us keep ahead of time. And so when they say that in front of the existing patient, and I thanked her for coming in early, it's the same meaning, but it means something different to that patient hearing.
Yep, absolutely.
So we also got people, if they started at different times and ended at different times, to come and say goodbye to everybody in the practice as well, as opposed to, you weren't the receptionist when I came in. Where'd you come from? Who are you? So again, there's those little shock things. But you were going to say?
I was just going to say, it's one of the biggest reasons when we're hiring, we have a good established culture, but we do not hire on skill set. We really stopped doing that years ago. And it is about that first face-to-face meeting is always about sharing the vision. Like, I love that I didn't know this is a Ritz-Carlton thing. That's amazing. But sharing the vision and talking about the culture of the practice and what we have built, to see if that resonates with that person right away. Because if it doesn't, we know it's a no-go. There's no way. We've had people opt out of the practice when they realize that just isn't something that isn't motivating to them. Now, I giggle sometimes because people say, who wouldn't want to work at a place that was really like fun and happy and caring and positive? But for some people, it's they don't have enough skill set, I guess, within themselves, and we can help teach some of it, but to be able to project that best version of themselves regularly. And so it sometimes is just, they think it's just too much work to be nice to everybody all the time, and they just can't do it. And so we try to pick those people out, because I've had several people in the last couple of weeks say to me, I need to hire again. And especially in the US, that's been a big issue lately. And they're like, and I can't find people who have enough experience. And I keep saying, don't stress about the experience part. Find really good people and then teach them to be good at their job. But if they're really good people, and customer service and building connection with other humans is a strength of theirs, they are worth their weight in gold. So teach them then how to be a receptionist, or how to be whatever it is you need them to be after.
Well, congratulations on that. Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time, and it's been great chatting with you. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of people get in touch with you and want you to give them a hand with their practices. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and keep on tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast.